What's going on, everybody? Connor here. It is New Year's Eve, and a couple days ago we saw the semifinals for the college football playoff, where Alabama beat Oklahoma 45-34 and Clemson beat Notre Dame 30-3. Now I want to talk a little bit today about that second game, number 2 seed Clemson beating the number 3 seed Notre Dame by a score of 30-3. Now obviously this was a big blowout. And after the game, everybody was really questioning the decision for Notre Dame to have been in the playoffs in the first place. And that specifically is what I want to talk about, because Notre Dame absolutely did deserve to be in the playoffs, and everybody that's saying they should not have gotten in are being victims to what is called results-oriented thinking, right? This is using information from the future to judge past decisions. So when we look at Notre Dame, what we have to remember is when we were talking about who should make the college football playoff back last month, it was three teams basically we already knew were going to make it. Alabama, Clemson, and Notre Dame had separated themselves. They were the three undefeated teams with very tough schedules. These teams were a kind of a layer above the other teams. And for that fourth spot, we were really debating whether it was going to be Oklahoma or Georgia or maybe Ohio State and UCF were also kind of in that conversation. But Notre Dame was our number 3 team. And when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, it's pretty easy to say why. A lot of people were knocking Notre Dame for not being in a conference. But when you look at Notre Dame's schedule, they actually had the second best strength of record in all of college football. They had a marquee win on their first game of the season against Michigan. They had also beaten several good teams. They had beaten Syracuse and Northwestern pretty definitively. And they had played 10 teams from Power 5 schools. So despite the fact that we're not playing in a Power 5 conference, they are an independent, they scheduled very good teams, and that they did have the second greatest strength of record, better than a lot of the teams, actually all of the teams that were fighting for them for these last playoff spots. Now, just because they lost to Clemson 30-3 does not mean they're a bad football team. In fact, just because we did not see Georgia or Ohio State or UCF play against Clemson, we have no idea what the final score of that game would have been. We do not know if these teams would have performed better. We know Alabama and Clemson were both 2-touchdown favorites. They were massive favorites to make the championship game, and make the championship game they did. So it's unfair to judge Notre Dame by one game. Well, all we knew from Notre Dame going into the college football playoff is what we saw from them for their first 12 games of the season. And that was an undefeated team that played against great opposition and played very well. Now, when you look, take another example, right? Last year in the March Madness tournament, Syracuse was the last team selected into the tournament. They were a surprise team, a team a lot of people did not expect to make it. For me, I had them as my 5th team out of the tournament. Now, Syracuse ended up going on to make the Sweet 16. That means they won 3 games in the tournament. They won their first 4 matchup, then they won in the round of 64 and the round of 32. Just because Syracuse won those 3 games does not change the fact that they probably shouldn't have made it into the tournament in the first place, because you don't know how other teams would have fared. And because these games happened in the future on Selection Sunday, we can only judge Syracuse by the games they had played during the regular season. Does that make sense? Since we don't know what other teams did, you can only judge teams by their resumes prior to Selection Sunday, or in this case, the final college football selection rankings. So at this point, Notre Dame was number 3, and they were undefeated with the number 2 strength of record. Now, I know a lot of people, again, going back to this conference thing, they're not in a conference. This also means Notre Dame does not play a conference championship game. And a lot of people say because of that, because they're not a conference champion, they should not have made the college football playoff. Now, not being a conference champion actually does hurt, despite what you might think I'm going to say. It does hurt their playoff chances normally, because they don't have that opportunity at a 13th game. Just how the Big 12, it was much more difficult for them to make the playoff before they had a conference championship game. That's why it seemed teams like TCU and Baylor did not make it. It was more difficult for them because they did not have a conference championship game. Notre Dame faces the same, problems that these schools did, meaning they don't have the extra game to build up their resume. But compared to the other teams, compared to the Georgias and the Ohio States, Notre Dame did have the clear better resume heading into the college football playoff. Now, Notre Dame had a very tough second quarter against Clemson. Outside of that, they were pretty even with with the Tigers. I think they only lost 7-3 outside of that second quarter. But regardless of what happened in this game, when you're deciding what 4 teams make the college football playoff, all you can look at is the resumes for the teams heading into that final college football ranking show. We don't know what would have happened with Georgia. We don't know what would have happened with Ohio State and UCF. Since they didn't play Clemson, and Clemson was a great team, we cannot know what would have happened with them. And because of that reason, we cannot knock Notre Dame for their performance in the semifinals. Notre Dame absolutely did deserve to make it into the college football playoff despite their struggles against Clemson in that semifinal matchup. Thanks for listening to the video. I hope you understand what I'm trying to talk about here with results-oriented thinking, and I will see you guys next time.